Welcome to the Voice of Counseling, presented by the American Counseling Association. This program is hosted by Dr. S. Kent Butler. This week's episode is Multicultural Competency and Advocacy for Communities of Color and features Dr. Carla Adkison-Johnson.
Welcome to the Voice of Counseling from the American Counseling Association. I'm Dr. S. Kent Butler, and joining me today is a very, very good dear friend, Dr. Carla Adkison-Johnson. Dr. Adkison-Johnson is a chair and professor of counselor education and counseling psychology at Western Michigan University. And she is a licensed professional counselor in the state of Michigan and Ohio. She's an LPCC. So she's going to talk a little bit today about her research, her advocacy, and they have been focused on the area of child rearing practices in African-American families. Dr. Adkison-Johnson often serves as an expert witness in the courtroom and educates family court judges, social workers, and lawyers to better understand culturally responsive ways of establishing policies and strategies to address the needs of diverse families more adequately. In 2021, this is a phenomenal piece, right? Dr. Carla Adkison-Johnson authored the book, Child Discipline in African-American Families, Culturally Responsive Policies. And it's not listed here, but I will let you know that this phenomenal woman is also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Multicultural Counseling and Development out of the AMCD House. And so joining me today, here she is, Dr. Carla Adkison-Johnson. How you doing today?
Well, Dr. Butler, that is an incredible introduction. I am doing fine. My brother. It is always good to be in your midst.
Well,
so,
it's always
thank you.
phenomenal to be in yours. Like, we joke about this, but we've known each other for
Long time.
That's how people
Yes.
do it.
Yes, more than 20
Oh,
years.
so you went there.
We'll
Okay,
stop
yes.
there. We'll just stop after that. More than 20.
More than 20.
Yes.
So before we even get started,
Mhm.
I see a piece of inspiration in right behind you, your right shoulder.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about that picture and what it means to you.
Well, it was the Little Rock Nine,
Yes.
coming outside of the building. And I put that in my office because, there's so many firsts that we are still doing in an educational setting that every time, a person of color or particular or Black and Brown, African American, Latinx, Asian American, Native American, we enter a space, it's like that. Sometimes it's like that. It's like where you enter and there are armed guards, meaning that you have a protection sense that you have to have around you when you enter into a space that's still new for us. And so that picture helps people to remember who enter my office, what that's like. And never forget that that's kind of what it is when you're negotiating spaces like this.
I love that perspective because you went someplace that I didn't think of. You said a place of protection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in a very real sense, those were the words that were used during that time, that we're here to protect you and to make sure that you're going to be safe.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
But I always lean towards why they were there in the first place that made it unsafe.
That's right. That's right.
And you took a very positive spin to it. And I think that's phenomenal in terms of how we continue to uplift and motivate and change the narrative of what was being stated, because in a very real sense, we weren't supposed to be there. Right?
No. I mean, it's one of those, you're right. We think about all of the atrocities and they were real,
Yeah.
and they are real.
Yes.
But then we were going to be in that space. That was destiny. That was determined. So because we walk into that spirit that, no, we're going to be here. But the reality is, but when we enter, this is the reality that you have when you enter. Right.
Nice. So you have done a lot in your career. You are seen as one of the stellar leaders of the counselor education field, just for who you are and what you bring to the table, doing your work out of Michigan, but at the same time, spreading it across the whole nation and beyond. You have this new book.
Yes.
Child Discipline in African-American Families, Culturally Responsive Policies.
Yes.
Let's talk
Yes.
about that. What's this book about? What brought it to the table? And, how did you come to write it?
It probably best fits my journey in the American Counseling Association,
Okay.
because the whole reason why I'm here is because I was a counselor in Ohio. Before that, and during getting my master's degree, I worked for Child Protective Services
Okay.
for a minute, thinking it was a part-time job to get the degree. And but I ended up interacting with families, and then it caused me to pause when I had to go out to homes to do investigations with African American families, and this thing called whoopings appeared to be a problem
Yeah.
for CPS. And as a person who's received a few along the way, growing up,
I
I
can't
was
believe
asking
that. I
questions,
can't even believe that
just
you
a
would
few.
ever have gotten, you were the
Listen,
type
my
of person.
mom is in denial. She says when people interview her or talk, she says, "No, I don't remember." What you mean you don't remember? So, but I had a
I
few.
remember.
Right. I remember those distinctly. And but what bothered me was they were like pathologizing this thing. And I was like,
Okay.
oh, okay, but I understood the situation and I don't think these parents should go to jail for this.
Right,
And
right.
so that kind of stayed with me. Fast forward, I become a counselor. I'm working at an urban community college as a licensed professional counselor. Me and one of my good friends, Venus Williams, who's now Dr. Venus Hewing, that's a counselor at another university. We said we got these notices about this conference called the American Counseling Association Conference. So we was like, girl, look, we're gonna go to a conference, because we had never been to a national
We ain't
conference,
never been
right?
to a
We
national.
ain't never
Okay.
been, so we gonna go. So, we got the community college to pay part of our way. We scrapped some money together on the other half.
Yeah.
And we boarded a plane from Columbus, Ohio to Baltimore
Okay.
to the 1990, 91, 92, I can't remember, that time conference. We get there, and one of the sessions we saw in the book was counseling or something African American families, or doing work with African American families. And the presenters were Dr. Mariana and Dr. Twinette Palmer.
Yeah.
And so we're like, oh, okay, let's go in here because we're dealing with African American folks. They can tell us something, maybe help us out. So I go into the room. It's standing room only in this session, and I'm like, well, who are these two women up here? And they're talking about their research. They're speaking truth to power. They're just caring in a way. And they said they were professors. I'm like, oh wow, I don't think I've ever had an African American professor, maybe one. And so Venus and I go meet with them afterwards, say, hey, we like what you did. And so then it was, I think, Mary Arnold that said, well, you should think about getting a doctorate. I said, oh, no, I don't know about that. I'm just barely paying my bills and trying to get what I'm doing here and the job. And then she was at Kent State, and Dr. Palmer said, no, she was at Ohio State at that time. You guys can do this.
Right.
And so I thought about it when I went home. I said, I just don't want to continue to be a clinician. I want to contribute something to the research, because she said there's another phase to this besides just doing this work. You can contribute in multiple ways.
Yes.
So then that's when I decided to go to Kent, and in the counselor education program, got accepted, and she was my chair.
That was
Child
Dr.
discipline.
Arnold.
Yes, Dr. Arnold. Dr.
And
Mary
then
Arnold.
after that, she went to Governor State. Is that when she went to
She went to
Governor
Governor State after that, and she passed away shortly
Yeah.
after that. But in fact, myself and Joanne Lifford Sanders were the only two students that she completed before her death.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
my God, that's a legacy right there.
Mhm.
She was definitely one of the stalwarts. She was really one of the leaders in the field, and
Yeah, she was one of the founders of the Counselors of Social Justice, I believe.
and
So
if she
her and
brought
Judy
you
Lewis,
in,
yeah.
she knew what she was doing.
Yes.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Wonderful, wonderful. And you talked about Twinette, and I haven't talked to her in a minute, but man, what a phenomenal person she was as well in the counseling field. I got to bring her back. I got to find out where she is and what she's doing.
She's retired at Central Michigan University. That I know. So it wouldn't be hard to find her, and she probably will come on.
Yes. So, this book inspired you to be written because of your life experiences.
Right. It inspired me. Well, it's interesting. My experiences as a professional CPS worker, things I didn't like that I saw, and then also inspired me as a counselor educator doing research in the field where I was experiencing working with other researchers, and they too weren't knowledgeable about this topic of child discipline in Black families.
Yes.
And when it was talked about, it was pathologized, such as, oh, we got to get them to stop beating their kids and this kind of thing. But none of that was anchored to any real research.
Right.
So with all of that, we're talking years of studying other things, but keeping this at the forefront, interviewing, doing research on several hundred African-American parents. And so at the end of the day, it's a combination of that plus a current qualitative study that I did the last year or so that gets into real time types of things with mothers and fathers, which brings it into all of the court work.
Right, right. So when you get pushback from people who say you shouldn't do that, discipline, corporate punishment or corporal punishment, or however they put
Yep.
that, when people tell you that, how do you respond? What's the 2-minute elevator talk that you have with folks about why this happens, especially in Black and brown communities?
So I would say in all communities, 2 minutes, usually when I'm in court, one thing in all communities, the idea that spanking automatically leads to violence and the like is the research is inconclusive. So we don't
Okay.
have cause and effect research. We may have some relational research. So
Right.
just with that alone for everybody, it doesn't automatically mean that there are other variables and things that come into play. Context is important. For
Right.
African-American families, we just have not done relevant research to tell the truth.
Right.
If you go look at the research from a pathological perspective, you get pathological results. And so I think the context was never studied
Yes.
in African-American families. So
Right.
we really don't know what they do. We do
Yeah.
now, and we're unraveling that because we're taking the time to see them as human beings and not
Right.
as slaves,
Yes.
to be able to actually investigate what they really do want for their children.
Yeah. So that leads me to ask you the question about, you know, safety, and the reason why, I hear a lot of times, and again, it's unsubstantiated because it's not research based,
Right.
but the people I hear who may engage in this as a process do it as a manner of safety and that discipline to keep the child within their grasp
Mhm.
so that they don't go off and do something that will cause them harm
Right.
or
Right.
harm the family in some regards, right? So like if they're out at a grocery store and they're doing something, it is done to keep them in line because they're thinking down the line, right? I don't want the police involved. I
Yeah.
don't want anybody else in my business. I need to make sure that you don't put something in your pocket because I'm thinking
Right. Right.
what that might be for not only you, but for us having to leave this store under those suspicious nature or under a suspicious nature or whatever have you. And then also in terms of Black boys,
Mhm.
to keep them safe
Right.
because they need to be able to be responsive to authority so that they don't get out there and, like we see in present day,
Mhm.
find themselves harmed
Right.
by someone who says they shouldn't have been in this situation, they didn't comply, or however that might look. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So when we take the time to study African-American child discipline, we have to study it from a comprehensive aspect, not just the physical discipline part, which we've done before. So if you
Mhm.
ask an African-American parent, do I spank my child? Then some majority or some may say yes, but that's not really asking the question. The question we need to ask is, how do you discipline your child?
Mhm.
So my findings have found, and the book talks about too in these findings, in that child discipline in African American families is on a continuum. So that means the most technique that is used is discussion by far. Discussion. Then, of course, it's remind the child about what we talked about. The other thing that parents often do is they use the warning look. They may look at you sideways and say, don't do that again, non-verbally.
Yeah.
Then the verbal comes,
Wow.
don't do it again. But if they have to, then verbal. And then, or if it's older, maybe withdrawal of privileges when the child gets older.
Right.
Physical discipline is used as a very last resort of the child discipline continuum.
Who's Dr. Atkinson?
Yes. And
Johnson,
so,
speak.
so the research, my current research shows, and then historically, even way before me, I'm not the first one that
Right.
studied this from a qualitative aspect. Dr. Marie Ferguson Peters in
Yes.
1976 is the one who went into the homes and say, hey, we have this phenomenon is what she called it. I call it a continuum because you got to tell the whole story. So
Yes.
from beginning to end discussion, and if
Yes.
physical discipline is used, it is age and context specific.
Yes.
So often is if belt is what, if you will, is used possibly when elementary school age child.
Yeah.
Usually it tapers off when the child is usually 11 or 12.
Mm-hmm.
It's done sparingly, but there are certain situations that warrant it,
Yes.
not all. And
Yes.
so those often is when the child is not just compliant, but the
Yes.
child is aggressive somewhat toward the parent, saying like, no,
Right.
I'm not going to listen to what you have to say,
Right.
in a blatant type of way. So
Disrespect.
when a parent has done all of those things,
Yes.
then physical discipline may be used. But what we need to see is the difference between discipline and child abuse.
Yes.
Discipline is a parent is using, you see this continuum throughout
Right.
their journey of child discipline and preparing their children for the world,
Right.
all things of the world, their happiness as well as their protection.
Right.
And then also their spiritual growth too. And this
Right.
is from an African perspective, not just an
Right.
African American
Right.
perspective.
Wow. You have said more than a mouthful right there in
You said
terms of
2-3
that.
minutes. I had to take a
And
few more
no,
minutes for that.
because I think it's powerful, because one of the things that you said with that, when you brought up the possibility of understanding it from a continuum,
That's right.
you know, my mind went to the grandmother who says, "Go outside and get that switch
That's
for me."
it.
And there was a story before that. There was a narrative
That's right.
all before that.
That's right.
And you know, I told you before not to
Yeah.
do that.
That's right.
You know,
That's
so
right.
whenever that
That's
whole
right.
when that whole statement gets made,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
there's already a confirmation
That's right.
that that child knew
That's right.
that that wasn't something that they were supposed to be doing, and so they were warned.
That's right.
But then when you talk about, they get breaks, right?
That's right.
They get,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
I'm gonna give, okay, you got to pass on this one.
Mm-hmm.
But when you see the look,
That's right. That's right.
you know you are walking in some dangerous territory at that point.
That's right.
And let me pull back. Dangerous is not the right word. You are walking in a pathway that will lead you to having to have some type of a punishment that is a little bit more than just me telling you not do that.
That's right. And the book shows all those scenarios and real life ways from the voices of parents right now. This is not historically. These are parents right now raising teenagers. So you talk
Yeah.
about African American male
Yeah.
teenagers, young men. So I have fathers and they're talking about discipline, and they discipline different.
Yeah.
So African American fathers, what my research shows, and African American mothers are two different perspectives of the continuum. An African American father on a mild situation will talk with the child. On a moderate situation, will talk with the child. On a severe situation, will talk with the child. Now, but if he has a 17-year-old son who decides that they're going to raise up, as
Woo!
they told me, then
Yes,
at
to my
that point
father.
they say, no, now it's either, as they say, and in the book talks about, there's one man in this house.
Yes.
And this is my house.
You
So
know,
there will be one man.
it
Yes.
reminds me of a story. When I was a teenager, I got tired of my father telling me what to do, and I invited him out to the front yard.
And you're still here.
He didn't take me up on the offer,
Okay.
thank God.
Okay.
You know, he didn't take me up on the offer. I think he found it humorous, right?
Yeah.
But I was like, okay, no, I'm done. You're not going to, nope, this is not going to happen today. And he was like, So he didn't show up. And but that was a whole different story.
Right.
But there was so much love and respect for my father
Right.
that I did not want to disappoint my parents.
Right.
At all.
Right.
And so I didn't do things that would cause me to get a spanking or whatever you want to call it, because I revered them. And I also, and I want you to talk about this a little bit, I feared them.
Yes. So attorneys, when I work with them, or not work with them, but some of the workshops and stuff, they talk about what's missing sometime is that, as they say, you didn't get your threat in. So they tell parents, please don't bring us this child at 16 who's, as they say, whooping up on you when at 3 or 4, there was something that was missing, that the child didn't understand the hierarchical position that the parent has, or parents
Right.
have in the household. And household doesn't mean a physical place in which parents have to reside. Because one thing my research shows is that it's not whether a mother and father are in the same house. Because I have findings that show whether they're outside of the house, and still the discipline continuum is
Right.
the same in most
Right.
places.
And there's a sense of respect. And again, when I say fear, I wasn't fearful of my father.
Right.
I was, but the fear I'm speaking of is the fear that I may do something that not angers, because that's not the right word, because he wasn't necessarily angry at me. He was angry at the behavior.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
That's right.
And so, but there was also the other moments when I would have thought that he would have been upset,
Yeah.
that he turned the whole narrative and wasn't.
Yeah.
Like the
Parents.
time that my sister and I ran down the hallway and busted a hole in the wall,
Okay.
right? So we're like, oh, we gonna get it. Dad is coming home, whatever, right? So the
Right.
fear, the thing that's coming
That's
up in
right.
us is that we're
That's
going
right.
to,
That's
there's
right.
something going to end up happening to us because of what we just did.
Right.
And then he came home and said, how did this happen? And fixed it. And so it wasn't that same dynamic. He was like, okay, I understood that, but you know that was inappropriate.
That's right.
And
One of the
that goes with what you were saying in terms of time appropriate too, because we were
That's right.
older at that point in
That's
time.
right.
So,
And it was consistent throughout the developmental process. So it's a developmental process as well too.
mm,
The thing that kind of disrupts that is that, unfortunately, in counseling and psychology, we deliver different messages to children.
okay.
And we delivered messages to children such as relationships in your house should be democratic. Um, your parents are awful if they say they're going to spank you.
Mm,
You can call the police on your parents if you, these are the things that, and so kids are now thinking that, oh, I should be able to express my feelings anytime I want to,
oh,
especially
raise
if
up
I
on you.
say, yeah, exactly. If I shut up talking to me is one of the famous things now teenagers are telling their parents.
Right.
And then, court judges are trying to figure out why the parent is having a reaction. Well,
Yeah.
the parent says, yeah, no,
Right.
you keep the kid, is what the parent
Right.
sometimes says.
Right,
So,
right, right. So,
yeah.
the funny part about that, the flip of that is that's what's happening. That's the narrative happening in a lot of Black households, right? But the flip of that is a student or kid that goes into another household
Yeah.
and sees a totally different dynamic,
Yes.
right? See
Yes.
a kid talking back to their parent
Yes.
and
Yes.
or cursing out a parent.
And it's been
And
told it's okay. And I think that's the important part, Dr. Butler, is that when we sanction that as a profession and say it's okay, or a kid isn't sanctioned that they can cuss at a parent, use cuss words in the house,
yeah,
or say if your parents cuss, then that's the reason why you're cussing, where it's okay. No, a parent, some have told me, I may do this, but you're not going to do this. And that's
yeah.
just the way it is.
You
And
know, I
so, yes.
so I saw a post on Facebook from a colleague, friend, who put in a request to her, friends, like, how do I stop my kid from saying a certain curse word, right? And
Uh-huh.
so there was all this conversation about, they said it and they said just like I do. It's like, well, one of the ways I stop my kid from cursing in the household is I don't curse in my house. And so that's also a part of the lessons, right? Is that you don't exhibit the behavior for the
You can.
child.
And I would say, I think that's right. That's the ideal way. I would say that, we want to model the best we can. I always tell people the best you know how,
Yeah,
but we know parents are human too.
right.
But what we don't want to is for kids, because what we had back then, I would say, is that there was this message of respect for elders, that
Yeah,
even though you may see an elder do certain things,
yeah,
that doesn't give you license
right.
nor justification for you to participate in that as well.
Yeah, and it also tells me I need to learn how to stay in my lane too.
That's
Because
right.
I will
That's right.
tell you that when I am out and about, because of how I was raised,
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes look sideways at somebody who's doing something. Like if there's an older person
Yeah.
in the store and I see somebody cursing, I'm
Oh,
gonna look
yeah.
at that person
Me
cursing
too.
and be like, how disrespectful you
Mm-hmm.
are. Even if you know or don't know this person, that you would do that. If there's a child present, I would do
Yes,
that same thing.
that's
Now,
right.
staying in my lane, I don't go out of my way and say something to these folks because sometimes people do things that
Yeah, it's a different
are
day.
inappropriate. Right,
Right.
right. So I'm not trying to inspire somebody to violence, right? But
Mm-hmm.
but that's kind of the things that go on. So this has been wonderful. So people can get all of this out of this book.
Yes, they can get, the historical walk between all many scholars who try to approach this, and then also current real-time data of what parents are doing
Yeah.
and
So I
saying.
love this is how you got started in the counseling
Oh
field,
yeah,
your journey
yeah,
to get
yeah.
here that is kind of put you in this track for research and
Mm-hmm.
advocacy with
Mm-hmm.
regards to this. Um, can you talk a little bit about how this was your destiny because of your life experiences? Can you kind of relate
Yeah.
to that in that way?
I think it's my destiny, because I think spiritually it was ordered for me to do this. I
Okay.
believe, it's a spiritual gift of being a counselor.
Uh-huh.
Of It's something inside of me that breaks my heart when I see that people are struggling. And so the way that it came to me to help was a sense of advocacy. For those who know me, I will advocate. If you feel that you can't build this wall, I'm going to make sure by the end of the day, you're going to build it. You may not like me in the process, but that wall going to be done. That's just kind of so that kind of spirit, I think, is why policy work pulls me into the advocacy role, because you got to know your space and your gift and your own personality.
Nice.
Whereas other advocacy people may do different types of things with people, but my calling appears to be, okay, how can the research that I do
Right.
help dismantle systemic ways of racism that manifest in courtrooms, that manifest in policies that hurt and harm Black and brown families.
Let's dig into that after the break. I would love to be able
Yeah.
to talk to you more about policies and what inspires you in that regard, because again, that's a social justice piece for
Yes.
me. Like,
Yeah.
it's not just go sit down with someone in a counseling room.
Right.
You are
Right.
actually out there doing
Mhm.
things in the
Mhm.
environment that helps these people go back out and after they come from your counseling session to live in the real world
Mhm.
and be able to experience it from that way. But before we go to break,
Yes.
can you answer me this? What do you recommend for counselors to do to become more culturally aware
Mm.
of how to work more effectively with African American children and families?
Go back to school, I guess. And here's the thing. I think conferences are great. That's a good start. So we got to have definitely content sessions that where there is an educational part, because there is just certain basic things of education we have to be able to understand so that we can do the surgery, as Dr. Ken Hardy says sometime, and trying to work with families, complex families. So we got to be able to do sometimes surgery. So therefore you got to be knowledgeable. So
Yeah,
I would say more of the educational types of training along with advocacy and readings and the like.
I like that because when you first said it, you said go back to school. I was like, oh, okay, all right. But we should want to be lifelong learners.
That's right. That's right. And
And
school means the educational arms at conferences. So,
yes,
there are ways to actually have, all day trainings,
yes,
educational credit that
yeah.
that people can get that kind of training.
So I like that too because a lot of times people come back
Mhm.
after they've been in your class, right? They couldn't get it when they were in your class.
That's
I've had
right.
so many students come back to me and say, you
Mhm.
know what, I didn't understand it then, but I get it now, right? That would be the perfect time for them to go back to school.
That's right. That's right. And we got to create platforms now that we can with all of this technology to do that,
Yeah,
to make that happen. ACA
yeah.
can do that.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, let me see. Maybe I'll start a new task force. Carla Adkison-Johnson will be the head of this task force. No, let me stop. Not the work that you're already doing. So, yeah, that is a great perspective in terms of how we can continue to move forward and to do the work that's necessary. Because to be honest, we can't get it all done
No,
in 2.5 years
no,
and expect that somebody's going to be able to be culturally responsive,
that's right.
have cultural humility, and
No,
work
yeah.
with any single person.
All those things are necessary, but they are not sufficient to do
Not
treatment.
sufficient.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mhm.
Wow. Here we are.
Here
Okay,
we
we
are.
might see that's a curriculum to be built right there.
Mm.
So yes, you're going to graduate from our program, but guess what?
Yeah.
You're going to be
It
back
ain't
in
over.
you're going to be back in 5 years. You're going to
This
be
is
back
just,
in.
as we say, Dr. Mary Honor said, this is just to stay, to have you stay in the room, that you don't
Mm,
leave the room in counseling.
woo.
Now, the next level is now you got to do the treatment.
Now you got to do the treatment.
Right.
Wow.
Hmm.
Well, you ain't said nothing but a word, and this is wonderful. So listen, we're about to take a break,
Okay.
and I appreciate you sharing your knowledge and what you've been doing. I think it was said in such a way that people can really kind of marinate with it, and
Hmm.
it can be something that inspire them to kind of think outside the box when it comes to
Yes.
how we work with these young people and how we work
How
with
we
these
work,
families.
thinking about our research, thinking about
Yeah,
the way we're teaching our classes,
yeah,
all of that.
all
Yes.
that. So this has been the Voice of Counseling. We're gonna take a quick break. We'll see you in a moment.
Counselors help positively impact lives by providing support, wellness, treatment. We're working to change lives. We are creating a world where every person has access to the quality, professional counseling, and mental health services needed to thrive.
Welcome back to the Voice of Counseling. I am Dr. S. Kent Butler, and I'm here today with Dr. Carla Adkison-Johnson, and we've been having a phenomenal time, a grand
Yes.
old time, talking about culturally responsive behaviors and how we work with parents in with regards to child discipline. So one of the things that came up in the first segment was you talking about what it's like to be doing expert testimony. And I've not had that opportunity in my career to be doing that. But can you talk about that? How did they find you, first of
Mm,
all?
mm,
And what has it been like for you to
yes.
be in that type of a situation?
So it's interesting you said that. So it's been about 7 years ago, and you just get this email when someone's looking for research.
Okay.
And so one of the things is that you got to have something out there for them to find,
Yeah.
because, and so it's the research. So one of the articles that I wrote, I believe, seeing African Americans as competent parents,
Mm,
was that one of the attorneys said, hey, if do you do research in this area? I have a parent, and that is brought up on charges of child discipline, which is more happening more than we think. And but I'd like to bring in an expert, because I have the state side of the story about that. It's horrible, it's awful, but yet there is some, it appears to be some research out there. So that was where it starts. That's where it usually goes. And often when I'm contacted by an attorney, usually it's a public defender, rarely a prosecuting attorney, but usually a public defender that needs some help with the family. Um,
so what was it like personally to go into a space and have to speak on behalf of that?
Scary at first,
Uh-huh.
because you're dealing with the court of law. You're dealing with, often they're criminal cases. You're
Hmm.
dealing with where a family or a parent, usually there's a felony that's involved,
Okay.
and serious jail time. And so the pressure is on,
The pressure is
the,
on.
the pressure's on, that you don't want to, you know, commit perjury, and
Right. That's one
intentionally
thing.
or unintentionally.
Right.
And then, you have to struggle with, okay, because you review all the documents, and
Hmm.
you can't just have a personal opinion. It's got to be fact led,
Factual. Right, right,
so
right,
that
right.
you can see maybe this parent did, participate in child abuse, and you would have to be honest with the attorney, says, no, this is what I'm going to say, or
Right,
or you let them know. So it can go either way.
right, right, right.
So you got to be very mature, I think, about the process.
Right. And so you had talked about it being scary and having to
Hmm.
kind of work through some of that as you get in there.
Hmm.
Looking in the eyes of people sitting across from you that
Hmm.
you're going to be talking about, or at least giving feedback or your own expertise on a situation.
Hmm.
Um, can you talk about maybe the possibility of being cross-examined? Was that
Absolutely.
also something that happened?
Yeah, it does. And one of the things is, you first have to qualify in court for those that do expert testimony. And, courts are often more familiar with psychologists and psychiatrists than they are with professional counselors from a research perspective.
Okay.
Definitely from us, from a fact witness, which is that you're talking about what goes on in the counseling session, whether or not a child should go with either parent. But when you're
Mhm.
talking in terms of research and trying to establish, whether or not a child perspective is appropriate or not, um, counselors sometimes are not always on the first list to do that. And so
Right.
it was interesting to qualify, and I qualified, of course, under American Counseling Association, my license and
Mhm.
my background. Um, to do that. Now, first cross-examination, I think the first time they tried to dispute it, but they lost that fight, because and what helps is that you have to have a litany of research behind your name. It does help to
Right.
say
You
that
need to
and
know what you're
stand
talking
strong.
about.
Yeah,
You can't
exactly.
just show up and say,
That's
hey,
right.
I'm
That's
the
right.
expert, and not have anything anything of substance to kind of show
And
for
you
it.
have to educate the judge and the prosecutor on who
Mm,
ACA is,
okay.
and who the American Counseling Association, how many counselors are they
Right, right,
responsible
right,
for,
right.
what the flagship journal and the flagship journals are, and how research is vetted.
Okay.
So you do have to explain that. So once they get an understanding, then they're on.
So you don't have to answer this question because it might be a little bit too personal in regards to that.
Okay.
But have you ever made an expert witness situation where you stated this, and this, and then you thought about it after it was over and said, I could have went this way?
It's a good question. I would say there are times where, because sometimes you're nervous, that I wish I would have said additional information.
Okay.
I would have come stronger, certain studies that, because you gotta, sometimes cite not just your work, but
Uh,
others before,
You gotta
it
summon it
wasn't
in. Gotta
flowing.
summon it in. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's where I some wish I would have could have done it in a certain type of way. When you get cross-examined, that's just those prosecutors are usually is someone from the assistant attorney general's office is the one that's cross-examining you, so they're
Yeah.
just gunning for you. And
Gunning
so
for you.
I've learned to be thick-skinned. Even I
Right.
went through just so too that it wasn't. I learned too. I had to get training, so it wasn't just my counseling. I actually went to I consult with an expert witness law firm out of Boston,
Oh wow. Okay.
Massachusetts. And so
Yeah.
I've, because of doing this a lot, so
Yeah.
I also received training from them as
Yeah.
well.
So I can imagine that you had to sometimes go,
Oh yeah.
I'm not going to let you do this to me today.
Yes,
Don't
yes, yes.
don't let Carla come
I
out.
know. And yeah, yes,
You want
yes,
Dr. Atkinson, buddy.
yes.
You don't want Carla. All right.
Yeah, there are
So
times, and I admit early on, I went there in the night, then I had to pull it back, because you're right, that's not helpful.
that's not helpful,
That's
right?
not helpful.
So so I can imagine that all of this leads to understanding policy.
Hmm. Hmm.
So can you talk a little bit about why it's important for counselors to not just be adept in what it is to be a counselor and speak in those terms, but it's also maybe the social justice piece too of bringing policy into your expertise?
So that's an excellent question, Dr. Butler. One of the things I even talk with my students about too is that this can't be a trend for you. It,
Okay.
it has to be. You got to know history. You have to know historical counts of you're dealing with African Americans in the United States. You have to understand all of what slavery was about and the laws that created slavery and the Constitution.
Mm,
Because by understanding that, when you're doing family work in systems, those same systems are using still a dated perspective. Keep in mind, in our society, African Americans have been in slavery longer than they've been out.
mm,
So, because of that, systems understand us more from that perspective, and how that we need to be surveillanced when it comes with the caring of children. Because parents, didn't have responsibility for children because they were slaves. The slave owner did, and the system did. So that's where the laws and policies and understanding still is. So when you're approaching a system, you got to know what the laws say for everybody, but how, because they still may not see us as human beings, how the law does not apply to us. The attorney, a couple of attorneys I've worked with, she's an African-American attorney who I published with, attorney Dorphine Payne, always would say in her presentation, she said, the first thing I have to do is make an African-American client human for the law to apply. And so the same thing in our research is that we have to know that the history enough to understand that when they see African-American or Latinx families, you have to understand and explain it within a historical context. So cultural humility and those particular perspectives are great, but that won't get you and keep you in the room when you're really trying to dismantle systems of oppression.
Can you talk more about that? Because I mean, it seems so logical that you need to make them human, but that just adds another layer to the work that you have to do.
Yeah, it does.
And I can imagine that's exhausting.
It's exhausting. And that's where I talk about that educational piece. So we know the multicultural counseling course is not enough, right? To get at this, to recognize that they still don't see people who have been enslaved as human beings.
Right.
So once you get that, though, I will say, once you get that in your spirit and then you're like, okay, now I'm ready to fight. I'm ready to advocate because I know how to deconstruct, I know how to deconstruct things.
Yes.
And that's the key. But if we go in thinking that, oh, my heart is pure and I believe in social justice, that's exactly what you get. They will say, oh, that's nice. We're passionate too. This family still goes to jail.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's where, so we get this person off the street.
That's right. We're protecting the public from this evil human being versus going in and saying, no, that standard or law that you have has not been applied fairly because the research you're using to substantiate this case is wrong. Now you're into the room where they have to question because they don't want to be wrong. A judge does not want to be wrong in the decision that they make. So now you got their attention. They'll say, well, okay, what do you mean it's wrong? Well, here's the facts.
Even beyond the policy, you maybe think about that in law enforcement and how you see the human before you see the person that you think has done this behavior, right?
What is it? Dr. Goff has been doing all that research on, police brutality and that they see African-American men in particular as this beast type. And so it makes it easier for them to shoot them because they don't see that they're shooting a human being.
Right. Wow.
So you can take children away from African-American families because, as some have said, well, they're used to it already. That's a dehumanized perspective.
Ooh. Wait a minute.
No. Yeah.
I don't need you to say that again, but it hit me. That hit me hard.
Right.
They took the child away.
Oh, yeah. So sometimes when you're in courts and when there's conversations, I've been in situations where, or even say we're dealing with CPS or social work and a child is removed and how that it goes something like, oh, well, the child's used to so much trauma in the home. This is probably better for them, than if they're in foster care than with this family. What they don't understand, it's still a child that's connected in that type of way. Exactly. But it's not, because there's a sense that we just are embedded in violence all the time. Our children need to be saved.
Yeah.
And so,
this is a strange question, right? Because now you got me wondering. So when you go back in history, you hear about the Black mother who has her children in slavery times, has her children off somewhere, but she's here being a mother in some sense to a white child.
That's right.
And so the disconnect then seems real, that if you can say, hey, I can just take this child away from their parent, I'm wondering how it is tied to a white mother who didn't raise her child because she had some Black woman come in and raise her child. Is that a part of that narrative?
Absolutely. Patricia Hill Collins, I believe, was in 1996. It might have been her first Black feminist thought book, but if I have the wrong name of the book, but she writes just that. She says that when it comes with this whole, she doesn't use the term dehumanization, but where you don't see Black mothers as mothers, is that, their mammy role, and their role is to take care of somebody else's, even nurse somebody else's child. And that other mother gets the classification as mother when the Black mother doesn't, because she's a slave. So it's a duty that you do. So it's the serving of whites that gives you for them that's a role, as if an animal would do that. So no, you don't have a classification of being a mother. Yeah.
Right. And so you can, and then if your viewpoint on life or your life experiences is that, then you don't have a problem taking a child away from the real mother.
That's how it goes. Yes.
Wow.
Right.
Woo. So let's bring it back to the students and the professional counselor.
Yes.
And one of the things you said that was beautiful is that, hey, school is not over.
The school's not over.
So what are some of the things?
So one of the things is petition their programs, and even K-CREP, to say more courses need to be a part of the training for our master's students, for clinical mental health, for school counseling, for marriage and family, all the master's programs. Is that, besides the foundational, if we're dealing with a large number of African American, Latinx families and other groups, we probably need to have specific courses to get basic information. Now's the time. Before we said, well, as long as you know a little, that will help. No, we are here. Enough people have died. And enough children have been ripped away. And what we witnessed at the border, 2 years, enough is enough. We need more than basic, more than a general course. We got to start landing the plane on these issues.
And we need more than just people who feel good about, or who want to have a feel good moment. And
that's
say,
right.
Oh,
that's right.
I care for you. But do you really care for me?
That's right.
Are you willing to go and be a co-conspirator and help to change some of these policies? And
do you view other families that promise? Do you view that other families should have the same rights and privileges and be able to raise their children as they see fit, even if you don't agree?
Even if you don't agree. Wow. So is there anything that we haven't discussed today that you would like to kind of touch base on?
So the last thing would just be, what can professional counselors do? And I would say is that, remember what the Code of Ethics and ACA says, is that this thing called autonomy, and that clients have a right to autonomy. And that means that when you're working with a client, that you need to help meet their needs. You're not an agent for CPS or other systems to surveillance families. Because what that means is, if you're surveillancing your client, that means that anytime your client goes left, right, or whatever, you're co-signing what someone told you to do, as opposed to being an advocate for the client. So I would say, if nothing else, remember this notion called autonomy when you're dealing with African Americans. You're their advocate. We hold you responsible for meeting their needs, not the system's needs.
Carla Adkison-Johnson. You done schooled someone today. You told them to go back to school, but you gave them a lesson right here too. That's beautiful. That is absolutely beautiful. So I know that you are experiencing some weather challenges.
Yes, a major snowstorm as we speak.
So you need to get out and take care of yourself in that way. Well, maybe my last couple of questions to you is, what is Carla doing for self-care?
I get up at usually 5 in the morning. I pray. I pray. I pray to God, for his awesome power, and then thanking him for the gift of being able to do this and the strength to continue to do this. That it pours into me, that helps me to do, it helps me to recognize my humanity, that the minute I probably walk outside that room, I already sinned and did something crazy, because it's just the way I am. But that helps me to treat clients and meet them where they are, no matter what they've done. It humbles me to help, from that aspect. And I buy shoes.
That's funny. You buy shoes.
I buy shoes.
You got
Italian. No, I buy Italian shoes.
Oh, okay.
I got a narrow foot, so because of that, it just so happened, that Monado Blotnik or something like that. I'm Prada every now and then. May have to do that.
So You are healed. Do you?
You know, I'm not, I
You're
can't do,
tall.
yeah, I'm kind of tall, so I don't do really the 4 inch, but I like a different kind of style type. If I got to do a 2 or 3 inch, it's usually, you know, nice and narrow, sleek, and has to be excellent leather. And so those are my other indulgences. You know, I that's the reason
Okay,
why I got
so
to keep a couple jobs, right?
yeah, that too, right? But you know, that's it. So just a reminder to those of you who are looking for what's the perfect gift that you can give to Dr. Carla
Yes,
Adkison-Johnson.
Salvador Ferragamo shoes,
Woo.
size 10, narrow.
I love it. I love it. Wow, you inspired me. You've always inspired me. I'm so glad that we have this circle that
Mm.
has come into counseling around the same time.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
so glad.
what people don't know is that, you know, Dr. Butler, myself, Dr. Cheryl Holcomb
Yeah,
McCoy, Dr. Daryl Bailey, and
yeah,
there's a host of other of us
yeah.
have been at this thing forever and a day. And I thank God for all of them because they've, you know, we've kept each other sane.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and on top of that, we hold each other up.
that's right. That's right.
And so I appreciate
Yeah.
you and all that you bring to the counseling field. You have, you know, we all kind of inspire each other in certain ways, but you inspire the researcher. You and Cheryl,
Yeah. Yeah. She's
phenomenal researchers,
awesome.
phenomenal researchers,
Yeah.
and you
Thank you.
know, kept us in tow in terms of the things that we needed to do. So thank you for all you do, all you're doing for the community, all that you're doing for counseling. Um, just a powerful woman, and I really truly appreciate having you in my life.
Oh,
Um,
same here. Same here. I told you, don't get me to start crying and falling out.
I just like that's my thing. I gotta make you cry.
No,
Anyway,
I can't. I refuse. I
I'm
refuse.
just joking. That's why we joke and we laugh afterwards, so
Right.
you don't, so the tears don't well up. But
That's right.
be safe
Okay.
getting home,
Thank you.
and we will talk soon. All
All
right.
right. All
This has
right.
been the Voice of Counseling. I'm Dr. S. Kent Butler. My wonderful, phenomenal guest today, Dr. Carla Adkison-Johnson. Much love to you. You all enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you next time.